Hello, everyone, and welcome to the movie Changeup Bad Batch spoiler review. We're going to review episode 3. The episode was called The Replacements. But before we get started, I want to wish happy birthday to the person that we wouldn't be here without, and that's George Lucas, whose birthday is today. So, happy birthday, George Lucas, who's definitely going to watch this review.
Happy birthday to the creator himself,
Yeah.
George Lucas. You know, especially in the animated stuff, he was so involved in the Clone Wars, and you can see his fingerprints like throughout all of this animated stuff. So, shout out to him.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So we're reviewing Bad Batch episode 3 called The Replacements. I'm Joe Fricke, by the way. I don't think I said that. And I'm with Tristan Mayer. Tristan, what did you think about this episode?
It was pretty good. It was much more of an episode of the week kind of thing compared to what we've had the last two episodes, but that's kind of expect from these shows. So I had a good time watching it. It had some good heart, some good character moments. I'm excited to talk through it. And as usual, there's one or two little lore tidbits that'll be fun to dive into and overanalyze and see where it can go from here.
All right, yeah, true. And I wouldn't say it's really episode of the week because I thought we got we didn't really see much new from the hero side. Like nothing new really got introduced, but I feel like we're starting to build up the villain side a little bit more with the Empire. So I think that was kind of what this episode was more about story wise. But also before we fully get started, I just wanted to let everyone know with each episode review, we try to do kind of a discussion about the larger Star Wars as a whole after our episode review. So I decided, because I believe it's called War Mantle is one of the names of the operations in this episode, is also it's a homage or reference to Rogue One, where Jin is reading off all of those names of different operations that the Empire is working on or worked on, or just things they have files on, and one of them was War Mantle. So we're going to go through all of those and figure out, okay, which ones have been released so far, which ones do we know about, and then we're going to speculate on what some of those other ones might mean. So that's kind of our fuller discussion after we review the episode. But all right, let's get
As usual, I have an Omega theory related to those names, so it'll be fun to get into that.
All right. Yeah, I don't have any Omega theory. I have a slight speculation of things moving forward, but I'm very curious to see what your theory is. So, do we want to just do a play-by-play for the episode?
That's what I was thinking, because we pretty much have two separate storylines here. We have Crosshair's storyline going and taking on the Rebels, the Saw's group that we saw in the premiere episode, and then we also have the Bad Batch storyline on the other side, and they're kind of crash landing Empire Strikes Back style storyline. So which one do you want to start with, Joe? We can go through the whole of each storyline, or we can kind of interweave it like they do in the episode.
We can interweave it. I think that makes the most sense.
All right, so like we start from the beginning of the episode, Bad Batch crashes at this what they think to be an abandoned moon, and they have to kind of search through this moon to find their lost part. But of course, things are not as peaceful as they seem, and they realize there's some kind of creature out here on this planet who's scratched up this hole, and there is some trouble here.
Yeah, heavy Empire Strikes Back feelings in this episode when they're on that crater.
Yeah, even in some of the shots felt very right out of it. Like when the creature's on the window and you see like just like out of the Empire Strikes Back, they're clearly throwing some references here into the Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, for sure.
What did you think of this setup though? Them kind of crash landing on this moon, and kind of a unique moon-looking place, very foggy. They have to wear these masks. We don't typically see people in Star Wars having to wear atmosphere masks. It's not really a thing they address much. They're just like, oh yeah, they can breathe here. It's good.
Yeah, you know? I thought it was kind of cool. It's just more added to the whole Empire Strikes Back. One of my biggest fears was like, oh, is this just going to be a play-by-play of the Empire Strikes Back? And then it turns out it's not a moon, and it's like a living creature and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, please don't go this way. But it was kind of more just like the setup and the atmosphere, and the plot really didn't follow that at all. So I was happy to see that.
Yeah, and we have this simultaneous storyline where before we get to them, Bad Batch are kind of reflecting on Crosshair, saying, man, I kind of miss him. He was part of the team no matter how it went down. And they learn, I hadn't realized prior to this, they didn't realize this, but they learned in this episode that it wasn't necessarily his actions. He was controlled by the inhibitor chip, and at the least the inhibitor chip enhances your negative emotions and makes you kind of angry and hostile, and he might not have been in control of his actions when he attacked the Bad Batch. So they have this little bit of hope, like maybe we can go back and we can bring him back to our side and bring him back to the team. And
Yeah.
you were the defender of that theory from the beginning that Crosshair is going to turn and come back to the good side. So how are you feeling now?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty confident on this. I mean, Star Wars is all about the choice between good and evil, and there was, not to jump too far ahead, but the final shot of Crosshair, he's sitting on his bed and he's looking maybe upset of his actions that he took during this episode. So I think if you ever see a character that's conflicted in Star Wars, by the end of the story, they will, choose the right decision and make the right decision. It's only the characters that are wholly evil that I think will remain evil, like Palpatine. That's why, you look at Kylo Ren in Episode 8 when Snoke says, like, even after you killed your father, you're still, like, it split you to the bone. I'm like, everyone that knows Star Wars, like, inside and out should know, okay, like, he's gonna turn good.
Yeah, something I like about Star Wars, you can talk about how goofy it is that Vader turns good at the last second and you're supposed to forgive him after he's slaughtered how many thousands of
Yeah.
people. Or Kylo Ren, he helped destroy multiple planets at Hosnian Prime and he's probably killed hundreds, if not thousands of people, and he turns good by the end. But that's something I like, that Star Wars has that optimism, where like if you want to, you can turn your life around and you can find good again, and there's forgiveness and there's hope. And Star Wars is all about hope, and even though I was the one saying Crosshair is going to die into the season, but like you said, once they start regretting their action, once they start having some conflict, it's probably going to be a turn to the good, even if it's like a self-sacrifice type thing. So I think for sure Crosshair is probably going to come back to the good side.
Especially with Omega hammering home that it's not him in control, it's the chip that's like controlling him and controlling his decisions. I think it's going to make it very easy, like once he's able to overcome the chip, for like the group to take him back in, and for even as fans, us watching, for us to be able to take him back in, because we know it wasn't really his decision that he made.
Yeah, and like we said before, like you mentioned something once, maybe it happens. You mention something twice. Oh, that's probably important. You bring it up 3, 4 times. Like
Yeah.
you want the audience to know about that. And they've mentioned Crosshair is the inhibitor chip, that it's not his choice, it's not his actions so many times in just this one episode that I feel like they definitely want us to know about that.
Yeah, they can't not talk about Crosshair without saying that he has an inhibitor chip controlling his actions.
Well, speaking of Crosshair, we jump from there back to Kamino. We haven't seen Kamino since I think the premiere episode, and Crosshair is in Kamino being experimented on by the Empire and by the Kaminoans, I guess you'd call them. They're trying to, I think, enhance his inhibitor chip, make him a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more of a leader, so that he can train these new recruits. We talked last week, I think it was, about what is the transition going to be between clones and stormtroopers. What is that going to be like? Why would they go from clones who can obey every command they give to stormtroopers who are kind of, they're flawed, they're civilians, they can make mistakes, they can deny orders, like we saw this episode. And we're seeing Crosshair being trained to be that transition, to be that guy who brings them between the clone eras and the recruited, trained era. So I think it'll be interesting to see his role throughout this. I think he'll be a guide into that kind of transitional period of Star Wars.
Yeah, I think he's going to fill that role that I think a lot of fans expected Commander Cody, to be in, and maybe Season 2 it'll be Commander Cody leading more of the conscripted soldiers, and he'll kind of be the villain of Season 2, no matter what happens to Crosshair. But I think, a lot of fans expected Commander Cody to kind of be in this role of training the conscripted soldiers and training the stormtroopers. But
I like Crosshair there. I think he's been established in just these couple episodes as an interesting character, so I'm really excited to see what he's going to be as this goes along.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Like, if you watch the credits, D. Bradley Baker is just he's credited as just voicing the Bad Batch. They don't break it all down. And one of the things, like, just thinking about it now, like, he's not credited as voicing the Bad Batch and Crosshair. It's all of them, which kind of gives me a little bit more of a hint that Crosshair will come back to them. But one of the things that he was talking about, I read in an interview, was like his mentality or what he thinks about as he's voicing each character. And I remember for Wrecker, he said he likes to just think about a child, and that's kind of his mentality when voicing Wrecker. And then when he's voicing Crosshair, he likes to think about a coiled snake, and that's his mentality when voicing Crosshair. So I kind of like that.
I like that. You can hear that in the performance. They're very different characters. You wouldn't even know they're the same
Mm,
voice actor, really. I
yeah,
mean, you do because they have the same base to the voice, but the performances are so different. I really appreciate how much he's given to that performance.
yeah, for sure.
And this scene, we also meet the new Imperial leader. We mentioned him in the premiere that he's going to at some point come and replace Tarkin, and it happens in this
Those,
episode. I believe his name is Rampart.
yeah,
He's the new Imperial officer who's going to be leading this transition between clones and an Imperial recruit army.
yeah. I think Admiral Rampart's gonna kind of take over for Tarkin as like the lead, like at least in what we see in the show, take over from Tarkin as kind of what we see as the leader of the Empire, and he's kind of our go-between probably, and he's gonna be the one that Crosshair reports to. So
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Even by the end of the episode, Tarkin's pretty much like, "Well, my role here is done. See you guys," and
mm,
kind of walks off and leaves Rampart to be the leader. So I imagine maybe Tarkin shows up for like a couple episodes here and there to
yeah,
reinforce that lower connective tissue kind of thing. But I imagine Rampart's going to be our main
yeah,
Imperial guy going forward.
yeah. Shout out Steven Stanton, who is the voice of Tarkin in this show, and he was also the voice of Obi-Wan in Star Wars Rebels, and that was in that one episode.
He's a good Tarkin. You
Yeah,
sounds exactly like the Tarkin I know from
yeah,
New Hope.
yeah,
They've done a lot with Tarkin in these animated shows. He's gone from just like this cold guy that he's just there for like a couple of scenes, and obviously he's not particularly developed or anything like that. But he's between the books and the shows, he's become a big character.
yeah. He's almost the face of like the political side of the Empire in Star Wars in a way. Like if you were
Hmm.
gonna do a Mount Rushmore of the Empire, Tarkin, it's basically Vader, Tarkin, Palpatine, and then like a stormtrooper is your four.
Yeah. And we go back from there to the Bad Batch. We mentioned the Empire Strikes Back scene. I think they mentioned the name of this creature is called the Autoloon Dragon, something like that.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Some kind of made up Star Wars name, but
Yeah,
they say it's drawn to electronics, and that's why it steals their
yeah,
part from their ship. So Omega or first Hunter decides he's gonna go track down this creature by himself, and Omega says, "Hey, I'm part of the team too,"
yeah.
and she joins them and joins Hunter, and they have this kind of duo trip throughout the woods. We'll get to
Yeah.
that in a second.
Well, I
But what
was
did you
gonna say
think of
one of the
this?
things I wanted to bring up was Wrecker was originally supposed to go, and then he can't go because he hit his head, and so one of his head hurts, and he says it's probably because he hit his head. One of the things I'm curious about is, do you think his Order 66 chip is starting to activate, and that could be why? And your theory of Omega's force sensitive, do you think there could be a scenario where his chip activates, he sees Omega use the force, and then Wrecker starts to go after Omega, and crew has to shut him down?
I like that a lot. I forgot to mention that. I forgot about that. His head hurts, and I definitely thought as I was watching it, like, oh, his head doesn't just hurt. You guys, you're not catching me off guard here.
Yeah, I'm not.
He's got some inhibitor chip.
I'm not that dumb. I'm dumb. I'm not that dumb.
Especially not in an episode where you talked about the inhibitor chip like 10 times already,
Yeah.
and we're only 5 minutes
Yeah.
into the episode.
And the episode basically opens with Tech, or maybe it was the previous episode, working on the inhibitor chip scanner, which is definitely going to come into play at some point.
I think that's definitely a good direction for it. I think I'm still a big fan of the Omega Force Sensitive. This episode just made me more and more of a fan of that theory,
Yeah.
and I think Wrecker connected a lot with Omega this episode. I think this was sort of it was her and Hunter's episode for most of it, but I think her and Wrecker had two really key scenes at the beginning and the end to kind of bookend their arcs.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see how their relationship goes forward. Like you said, if he has that chip and he sees that Omega's force sensitive, are we gonna have a moment where he says, "Good soldiers follow orders," and then just attacks her and they have to fight off Wrecker? You know, is that
Yeah.
the twist? Do you think Crosshair is gonna be the bad guy who dies at the end, and then it's Wrecker? They
Especially
kill off Wrecker.
especially as he has that fun uncle moment, where he makes the bed for her at the end. I know we're jumping around here a bit, but so if you build up that kind of almost brother sister relationship between them, and then he turns on her, it's gonna be gut wrenching. But the one thing that's nice about this show, because D. Bradley Baker voices 90% of the cast, you can kill anyone at any time because no one's getting fired. Like, it's not like, oh, well, we like D. Bradley Baker, we can't kill Wrecker because he's the voice of Wrecker, it's like, well, he's got 5 other characters he voices on this show, so it's all good.
Yeah, and there's
He'd
so many
probably be
clones out
happy
there.
to see a few of them die, so it's one less he has to do.
And you think about it, they could easily replace Wrecker with, Cut or some other kind of character that we've introduced to a new character.
One of the things I was thinking is they basically have 2 tech characters with Echo and Tech. And I almost feel like if Wrecker dies, you could use the fact that Echo is basically a cyborg and make him more of like the strongman character because he has just robot parts. So I think if Wrecker dies, you could kind of transition Echo into being the strong character because we don't really need 2 tech characters.
Yeah, I think especially if we end up bringing Crosshair back into the fold and he becomes a part of the Bad Batch and doesn't just have like a hero turn and then dies, something like that. I think if he becomes a member of the team at season 2, we have a big crowded lineup of characters at that point, and some of them are hitting the same beats. I think Crosshair has that kind of assault forward kind of mind where he's going to be the one who's leading the charge in a lot of ways. And do we need him and Wrecker and Echo and Tech and all of these characters in one go? I think Hunter's probably going to stick around. He's basically the main character.
Hunter is essentially the main character. But one thing too is a lot of these Filoni-led animated Star Wars shows get darker as they move on, and one way to do that is to kill off your more child-friendly member of the Bad Batch in Wrecker.
Yeah, I think that might be the direction they go. You got to knock this cast down a little bit.
Yeah.
We'll go from here to. We mentioned Omega kind of joins Hunter on this hunt. We mentioned last week that we haven't seen Hunter necessarily use his skills.
That was the one skill. That was like my big like fist bump moment. Even it's just him like touching the ground and smelling it. It's like you say he has enhanced senses. I want to see it, and we saw it today.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted. Hunter going through like a jungle, hunting down a creature. I was like, give me like a predator scene where he's hunting down some creature, and then of course like next episode they give us exactly that. So I was happy with that.
Yeah, and then we even got that a little bit in the opposite side with the villains when they're looking through their scopes and they see like the heat vision. So we got predator vibes on both sides. Yeah,
both of these storylines have some interesting parallels. I think they go side by side, intercut here for a reason. I think you're supposed to see the opposites and why these are different, and where the Empire goes in and just kind of kills it out, asking questions, and then by the end of this we get maybe killing isn't the answer all the time, and maybe you can get some other solutions. And we go from Omega and Hunter starting their journey here back to Kamino once again, where Rampart gives them a mission to go out and take out the recruits. You mentioned it before. I didn't think they'd bring this specific team back, but it's cool that they're going out and hunting down the exact same team that Bad Batch failed to kill in the first episode.
Yeah.
I was curious if you'd see Saw again, but once they get there, they realize that Saw has already left. And I don't know how far we're going to go along this scene because it's kind of the rest of the episode in terms of Crosshair's storyline.
Yeah, we can keep on going.
They're hunting down the what will become the rebels, I guess. They're the remaining separatists, or whatever they want to call them in this era. But it's Saw's group of rebels, and Crosshair is not having much mercy for these guys.
No. Yeah, it's like they take out the rebel factions, and then all that's left is basically the civilians that were along for the ride, taking a ride out. And he's like, well, time to kill you. And basically the first generation stormtroopers were like, yeah, but we're not here to kill them. And Crosshair is like, well, they're here, so they're going to die. And the main leader of the kind of stormtrooper group is like, well, they're not part of the mission, so we'll just capture them. And that's when Crosshair drops the most dark and cryptic version of good soldiers follow orders that I think I've ever seen in either Clone Wars, Rebels, or Bad Batch. But here we are. That's definitely the most chilling version of it I've heard, where he says it and then fires his gun, and that's kind of that.
Yeah, I like this line, good soldiers follow orders, as much as you can like it. It's a good chilling line. Like you said, every time it comes out, I feel like I'm like, oh god, something terrible is about to happen. Even if it's in the comics or in books, like when you hear that line, you're like, something bad is about to go down.
Yeah, if we were to do a Disney or like a Star Wars animated Mount Rushmore of like, and then one of them were quotes, good soldiers follow orders definitely would be one of my picks.
Yeah, especially because that wasn't something they took from the movies and kind of
Yeah,
rebranded it. It's like their own thing that kind of goes along with the movies a bit,
yeah,
but it's not like a
yeah,
callback line or anything like that.
yeah.
There's a scene we missed I want to mention really quick where Crosshair and these new stormtroopers are on the ship kind of heading out to this planet, and they have this confrontation where the stormtroopers essentially like, well, if you're so good at being a soldier, why are you getting replaced? And essentially says like, enjoy being commander for now because obviously the days of the clones are numbered if they're bringing in recruits to be part of the military. And I think from this scene you get that Crosshair has this vendetta against these stormtroopers a bit.
Yeah.
Like they've questioned his leadership, his they've challenged his masculinity as leader a bit, and you wonder how much of that going into this scene. Like was Crosshair looking for an excuse to gun down this guy who was questioning him, or
I think it's a little column A, a little column B. Like, this guy wasn't doing what he's supposed to do. He's in the way. He's standing in the way of the Empire, but also, fuck this guy, so I'm gonna kill him.
and I like the design of the costumes or what you call them, like the armor on these
Yeah.
stormtroopers. It reminded me of the Public Commando game and those kind of armors that were like around this era at the same time. I'm really excited to see how they're going to transition slowly but surely from the clone armor and this armor into the stormtrooper armor. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to see that happen.
One theory I want to bring up that I've seen and I kind of agree with is there was a the female stormtrooper didn't really talk in this episode. I know the first time if you're watching this and you haven't watched our previous episodes, basically what I do for any of our reviews is I watch them first thing in the morning before I leave for work, and then I'll watch the episode again sometime after work and before we film, so because I want to watch it twice. But the first time I watched the episode, I'm like, she doesn't talk, and that's kind of weird. And then I saw a theory online, wondering if that's potentially Fennec Shand, and she like sees what goes down and defects from the Empire and kind of does her own thing. But they didn't want to like drop that bomb yet or show that reveal yet, so they're just like, okay, that's Fennec Shand, but she's not gonna talk. So I want your thoughts on that. I've seen people online say she's Iden Versio, but she looked like too pale to me to be Iden Versio, and I don't think because there's been controversy before with some of the clones of their skin being too light and the whole whitewashing thing. So I don't think Disney would do that. So I don't think it's Iden Versio, but I want your thoughts on potentially if that's Fennec Shand.
I think that'd be kind of cool. We get to that point where we start to near that line of does everybody have to be a character from something else, you know?
Well, we know she's in this show at some point because we've seen like clips of her, but she's more in her like what we've seen from her in The Mandalorian.
Yeah, that's why I'm a bit softer on this because we know that she's gonna show up, and I think that it could be a part where it fits. And if these characters show up one more time, I think maybe that's a sign that they're gonna be important. But if we don't see this specific group of clones or the specific group of troopers again, they could just be like whatever Cross's army was for this episode. But I'd be fine with that. I think part of the appeal of these animated shows is that crossover appeal more, and you want to see some stuff that
Yeah.
connects. And you mentioned in the beginning that there's a bit of a lore drop throughout this episode, and that's something that I like too. Like you watch this and you want those little tiny moments where you're like, oh, that's from this and
Yeah.
that's from this, and it doesn't necessarily affect the
And
episode.
it's a thing that like even people like me and like 99% of viewers, they hear War Mantle and they're not going to remember, oh yeah, that's from that one half a second moment from Rogue One.
Mm-hmm. This show does a really good job, and all these animated shows do, of bringing in that lore and bringing in the connective things without like grinding the story to a halt and pointing it out and saying, "Look, remember that thing from that thing?"
Yeah.
It's pretty natural, and even we'll get towards the end of the episode when we have this Camino conversation where it does that similar thing where they're talking about lore stuff, but it's so quick and it
Yeah.
flows right into the scenes. You don't really even notice what's happening until you pay attention.
Yeah.
Let's go from there to the Bad Batch really quick. We got a scene now where Hunter finds the creature and the part, and they get this kind of confrontation where Hunter's mask is knocked off. He's choking on the air. He's knocked out, and now it's up to Omega to save the day.
Yeah. Which they've done this trope now like 3 times, so I'm really hoping we don't get that trope the next episode, or that's when I'm gonna be like, alright, like I'm kind of over this whole everything goes to shit and then Omega just does it herself for no reason. Like
Yeah, they're
I'd be
going out of
okay
the
if they
way to
do a
make them
play
like
on
look
it next
efficient.
episode. If they do a play on it next episode where she tries to take over and then it just fucking goes to shit even worse, like I'm fine with that. But if like I don't want every episode to be that.
Yeah, I'm curious what we'll get next week. Another one where it's like there's no setup for what's coming next. But yeah, they're starting to repeat a little bit of the beats here with some of the characters, but that's kind of to be expected in the first few episodes of a show. I think they're still trying to find the momentum a little
Yeah,
bit. They're still trying to find the characters. And I know this isn't like a weekly, it's
yeah,
still a weekly show, but it's not like a TV show where you tune in
yeah,
necessarily. So, but I know when you do have that kind of format, you want to be able to have an entry point for new viewers. Like if someone were to theoretically come and be like, "Oh, I want to watch Bad Batch," and they just watch like this week's episode, they want to be able to capture the characters and the
mm,
dynamics in the first few episodes. And when you write for TV, you want to in the first few 3 or 4 episodes, you want to kind of hit them over and over again with the beats of these characters, so that as someone's
mm,
tuning in late, they still get the basics of the premise.
yeah,
And we mentioned too, we're kind of going back and forth here really quickly, where now Crosshair and the soldiers slaughter these rebels pretty much, and they're just where the Bad Batch came in slow and came in easy. They're just shooting first, asking questions later, shooting people down, shooting down civilians at this point, and you clearly see that the Empire is not behaving like the clone army would. And
no. No, yeah, it'd be very. My thing I took away from this is how different would the world of Star Wars be if Saw Gerrera was with his crew that day and he just got gunned down.
yeah, I didn't think about that, but you're right. There's a lot of like happenstance, coincidence type things in
Mm,
Star Wars that I really enjoy, where you see like, well, if one little thing happened differently, this entire story would play out different.
mm,
You know, Saw is such a vital part of the story. Like he's not a key character to the movie necessarily, but to the plot, he's big. You know, you wouldn't have Jyn Erso taking down the Death Star plans. You wouldn't have the rebels with that one secret little thing they need to get the Death Star down. You pretty much probably would have had the rebellion destroyed
mm,
before it even began, you know, because Saw was a pretty key figure in bringing those rebels together, whether it's in Rebels, whether it's in Rogue One, whether it's in
yeah,
Fallen Order.
yeah. If basically if Saw died right there, then he's not there to like raise Jin, and Jin probably doesn't help them get the Death Star plans. The Rebel Alliance never gets the Death Star plans, and the Empire rules forever because Luke's not able to blow it up.
Yeah, Luke could be a farmer for moisture farmer,
Hmm.
dreaming of the academy. Maybe Luke would even join like the Imperial military.
Yeah, Luke joins the Imperial military. Like Luke joins the Imperial Academy, and he runs across Darth Vader, who tells him all about the Force and the dark side, and reveals himself who his true parentage is. And Vader and Luke team up to kill Palpatine, and Luke and Vader rule the galaxy as father and son, all because Saw Gerrera decided to go somewhere else that day.
Yeah, Saw Gerrera is really the key to all of this.
Yeah, Saw Gerrera, most important character in all of Star Wars. Who knew?
We'll go back here to Bad Batch, where Omega faces a creature, but rather than kill it, she decides to lure it away with her light, and she retrieves the part and doesn't have to kill or fight the creature to get it. It's very similar to Rey's scene in Force, or in on last what's that fucking movie?
Rise of
Rise of
Skywalker.
Skywalker,
That
where she
classic,
finds
great
that
10
like
out of 10 film that everybody loves.
the best Star Wars movie, clearly,
Yeah.
where Rey finds that like snake creature, and rather than killing it necessarily, she empathized with it. And I think Omega is almost like this. Oh, you guys have problems with Rey? Let's just like fix it a bit and see what you think now. You know, like she
Omega
seems
is
like she's
Rey's
doing a lot of the
mom.
same beats of Rey. Yep,
Yeah.
you heard it here first, guys. Omega is Rey's mom. It's
Yeah.
confirmed now.
Yeah.
But I do think this further fuels the theory that Omega at least has some level
Yeah.
of empathy or force sensitivity or something like that.
Yeah, because we saw Ezra do the same thing a few times in Rebels. So
And I think we're just trying to get reinforced home a few episodes over and over again that she has this empathy, that she's able to, whether she's aware of it or not, sense the emotions of other creatures and other people.
yep.
And I think she sees in this creature that it's not going to attack her. It's almost scared and needs to be like lured away, and there's no reason to kill when you don't need to. And
No.
meanwhile, Crosshair is slaughtering civilians just because
Hmm.
he like feels like it,
Yeah,
and
just
he's
because.
shooting troopers down because they're not listening to him. And
Yeah, yeah. Crosshair likes shooting people. Who would have thought a guy named Crosshair likes shooting people?
I know, shocker.
Yeah.
But yeah, Crosshair is slaughtering civilians. Meanwhile, Omega is saving creatures, and we get back to Omega reunites with Hunter real quick, and she just says, "Oh yeah, I got your blaster back. I got the part back, and I saved the day once again."
Yeah. Omega's a Mary Sue.
God, cancel Omega.
Yep.
So we go back to this last scene with Crosshair, where he returns to Camino and kind of gets a little bit of a congratulations from Tarkin and from Rampart, and they're like, "Oh, one of your soldiers got killed," and they're like, "Oh, cost of the war. Someone died in action, whatever."
Yep.
And that's when Tarkin says, "Well, it was nice seeing you guys, but I was only paid for 2 episodes, so I'm gonna head out now."
Yeah.
And Rampart, the B Imperial guy, is gonna take over.
Yeah, we can't have our face characters and everything, otherwise it'll feel too connected. So he's just here for like 3-4 episodes a season, and meanwhile we'll bring in Admiral Rampart in here.
How much of Rampart do you think we see? Is he going to be as prominent
he's
as
gonna be in
Callus?
he's gonna be in every episode guy. I feel like, especially because like I said, it's that same model, so it's that same guy we saw in that hologram in the last episode, who was talking about needing your chain code and all that. So yeah, I feel like he's definitely gonna be in every episode guy.
Oh yeah, they did mention here he was the guy who was the leader of the chain code initiative and was able to get that
Yeah.
chain code system out to the worlds really quickly, and that was what inspired Tarkin to choose him and say, "Oh, you can be." I can't remember it's one of the terms from Rogue One that got
War Mantle.
mentioned here. War Mantle. He says he's going to be the leader of the War Mantle program, which I believe is in their transition program where they're going to be bringing in their recruits and their Imperial military.
Yeah, it's the transition from clones to conscripted soldiers.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a bit after the episode. I think we want to get into that theory. Before I get there, though, I want to close this out for this. We mentioned it earlier, this last scene with Crosshair, where he's sitting on his bed and he's kind of reflecting on what he did that day. And it's almost like a Rorschach test where you're trying to read into what is this guy feeling in this moment right now.
I felt like a hint, a little more sparkle in his eye. Like I paused it and I'm like, he's definitely like on the verge of like crying, of like that's definitely of like a what have I done type of look.
Curious. I'm looking forward to what's going to happen with Crosshair. I want him to go back to the good at this point. I think it would be heartbreaking if he just didn't, And I think you mentioned maybe subverting the Omega thing next week, and I wonder if they will subvert that Star Wars trope of like, oh, the bad guy's going to turn good, and maybe we'll have that hint like he might turn good, he wants to turn good, but ultimately he can't, he doesn't, and he makes the wrong choice.
I was about to ask, do you think there's a way that we get like he has the inhibitor chip and he knows it's controlling him, but he knows he can't override it, and for whatever reason they can't take it out, and so he basically just has to be killed? Or is that way too dark for a TVCG show?
They might find a way around it,
because we saw some dark shit in this episode. So
yeah, we saw Crosshair murder unarmed civilians at this point. And we're only 3 episodes in. We're talking about like, oh, when Filoni gets a few seasons in, by season 3-4 it's pretty dark, and now we're at episode 3, it's pretty dark already. So
yeah, I mean,
he might be skipping that kid stuff at the beginning.
They're basically treating this as almost like Clone Wars season 8 in a way.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm thinking. The tone is not starting out like Clone Wars season 1 or Rebel season 1. We're already taking it a little bit more seriously than those seasons did.
Yeah.
That Crosshair scene, I wasn't sure what to read into it. I was wondering, is he upset at himself? Is he just concerned of what he did? Is he not quite? I just want to get a bit more Crosshair. I'm sure. I mean, we will. I want to know a bit more of what his motivations are at this point, and how aware is he of his actions, and how in control of his actions is he right now?
Yeah, I'm gonna say not very in control.
I'm wondering if his arc will be like an information arc, or if he's gonna be like, something's up with this inhibitor chip thing. I gotta figure out what's going on. He'll do some kind of like, I'm gonna go to the archives and I'm gonna figure out what's going on with these inhibitor things, and maybe I'm gonna find some character who can. They mentioned the inhibitor chip scan. Maybe they'll use that and somehow he'll get the chip removed or reset or edited or something like that.
Yeah, that's possible.
And our last scene here, we I will talk about that Camino conversation after this, but I want to mention the Omega scene where Wrecker made Omega a room. In the
Yeah.
beginning of the episode, she kind of didn't have a place. She was just kind of floating around in the ship, and Wrecker made her a nice, cool room. He's treating her like a kid while also respecting her and her needs. I think it's a really
Yeah.
cool scene.
Yeah, I really liked it. And he also gave her his like stuffed animal too that he had.
I forgot about that. Yeah, and he mentioned that I think in previous episodes it was like an important thing to him. So
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah.
I'm sure that'll come back in some emotional moment. You know, if
Yeah.
Wrecker dies and she's sitting there holding the animal or
Oh
something.
god.
Yeah, that's the final scene of the episode, but I do want to bring up this Camino scene. I think it could lead us into some predictions and stuff like that. So if you have any final thoughts before we get into predictions on the episode.
No, I just have predictions. Yeah, it was just a solid episode. Show's already starting out a lot darker than I expected, but I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I'm really having a good time with it. I was expecting it to be a lot lighter. Like you said, it's darker than I thought it would be. And I was prepared for it to be like, okay, we're going to spend this season kind of like jumping around, doing goofy stuff, beating some fun characters. And
No,
then
we're
maybe
just,
by season two, season three, we'll be out with the real dark stuff. But we're already getting
no,
there
we're
pretty
killing
quick.
civilians. Episode 3. So
I wonder how long this will keep up. Like, how we got what 16 episodes something this season. How many of these are going to be like plot focused heavy episodes? And I'm sure one or two are going to be like a Chopper comes home or whatever it was called, like some kind of like kid episode.
Chopper base or like the,
Yeah.
whatever. Oh god. But the thing is, we have a droid in this show and they never show it. Like that dumb Gonk droid that like never gets shown, except
Yeah,
for when like Omega's sleeping against it and then it just kind of wakes up.
I wonder if we're gonna bring in any kind of droid or comic relief characters into this, because Omega still is our pretty much like our kid insert. You know, the same way that Chopper was in a way, but she's not necessarily comic relief. So I'm wondering what that's gonna be. Wrecker, I feel like, is that character
Wrecker
at
is,
this point.
yeah.
And I like that a little bit more because I feel like it's a more interesting character than Chopper. Chopper's a cool design and stuff, but like he wasn't my favorite member of the Rebels team.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. Chopper sucked. I'm gonna say that.
Dave Filoni voiced it though.
Yeah.
So
C1-10P. That little fucking dick.
Okay, I'm gonna bring up this Camino in scene where
I have a couple predictions too, but I'll let you start.
there's like 4 sentences and all of them are like lore sentences, and I'm like, wow, they're mentioning a lot in this one scene. Yeah, it's right after Crosshair's returned and Tarkin leaves, and the Kaminoans are sort of discussing what's happened. You know, the Empire is clearly stepping up a bit more than they expected them to be, and they're taking a lot more control than they thought they were going to, and they're a bit concerned about what their future is going to be, because their value to the Empire and to the galaxy at this point is their cloning technology, and if the Empire replaces clones with troops, then what is the point of Camino?
Yeah.
And I think they see that, and they're scared of that. And they mentioned Jango Fett's DNA material is degrading.
Which I'm like, that's kind of odd because he died at this point now, like 3.5 years ago. Like, how much DNA material could have survived like this long? Like, obviously, it's all like fantasy sci-fi, but I'm still looking at that being like, his DNA material should have degraded like a while ago.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they have some kind of DNA storage or something, you know? But I think that's an interesting answer for maybe why we don't see a lot of clones in the future, because if they don't have the original DNA material, then they can't make these exact types of clones again, which is why they're trying to, according to them, breed a superior clone.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what that will be.
I'm curious what that means. Are we leaning more towards like a Death Trooper type of deal of that we see in Rogue One? And are we going to find out at some point that those are actually like super enhanced Jango Fett clones? Or are we making more Omegas? Like, what is this super enhanced clone? Like, we'll obviously find out at some point, but I'm very curious what that is.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll tie into the Bad Batch, into Omega, because they mentioned like, to do this, we have to be able to get the Bad Batch back, essentially. And I think Omega is probably that enhanced clone. We mentioned these theories throughout that she's force sensitive, and that was probably part of her experimentation, and it was intentionally done by the Kaminoans. I mentioned last week that the Kaminoans don't do anything by accident, and there's always a purpose. And they wonder aloud what's Omega's purpose, and I think that's probably hers. I think she was a testing platform for whatever this superior clone is going to be, whether that's force sensitive or whether that's something else. And they said we need a direct source, and they decided we have to lure the Bad Batch back somehow, but we only need one. That's a frustrating Dave Filoni line where I'm like, what do you mean you only need one? Do you need a specific one, or do
They
you
have to
just
need
need
one
like
because they
one?
already have Crosshair. If they only need, well, I guess because Crosshair's already there. So if they only need one, then it'd be like, hey, Crosshair, come here for a minute. Let me get some blood. So it has to be Omega at this point.
That's what I'm feeling because when they say we only need one, are they talking like they have to be talking a specific one at that point?
Yeah,
Because
because
they have one.
yeah, they have Crosshair. So
It's got to be Omega. I think she's a special case, and I think that she's going to factor very heavily. I ultimately think like she's going to be like a MacGuffin, similar to Grogu. I guess we've mentioned that the Grogu similarities are there, but I think we're going to have the Kaminoans being the ones that are kind of looking for them now and trying to lure them back somehow.
Yeah.
Trying to get Omega, and they mention this is key to our survival. So I think they realize like if we're no use to the Empire, they're not going to keep us around.
yeah, for
We
sure.
know too much. We played too big of a role in the rise of this power, and maybe we got involved with the wrong people. Essentially, is
Yeah.
my thinking
Yeah.
here.
And one of the things I think too of like I don't know if it's the overall arc of this series or this season, but I do think a lot of this series because we've seen like the individuality of the clones be taken away, and I think what we're gonna see is clones starting to override their inhibitor chips, and it's gonna be the failure, because they obviously don't succeed, so it's gonna be the clones rising up against the Empire and just getting decimated and destroyed, and probably the Bad Batch and like a few clones like Wolf and Gregor and Rex and are the only ones that survive.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the direction they go. There's got to be a reason for why these clones aren't around, and I think it'll be more interesting than just like, oh, they kind of died off. They decayed and they were no longer useful.
Yeah.
I think it'll be something big, like a siege of Camino that I'm hoping for.
Yeah.
The Empire versus this clone army is going to be a huge action sequence, a whole episode or 2 episodes, maybe the season finale at this point is what I'm thinking. You mentioned either the series or the season, and I feel like it's probably a season arc. They're moving pretty fast along this storyline. It'd take forever if they're like, okay, we're gonna make this last 5 seasons, and we've already brought up the fact that we need to get this clone, we need to get this survival, all this kind of stuff, and I hope it's one season arc because I want to move on to other arcs after that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, do you have another theory or?
Oh, that's all I've really got for you right now. I do think Omega is going to be a key role. We mentioned it already, but I do think that she's going to be significant, and I can't wait to see what that's going to be. I can't wait to see how she grows as a character, what her role is going to be in the team. I hope that she's not just the one who saves the day at the last second every time. I hope she has a bit more of a role to it, and I'm sure she will. I'm looking forward to it a lot.
All right, I have one theory that I don't know if it's necessarily a theory or just a thought, but it's okay. We have the character of Echo, right? I mean, Echo is a pretty common word, so it might be nothing. But on an Empire Strikes Back on Hoth, it starts with the attack on Echo Base, which is the name of their base on Hoth. So I'm curious, do you think there will ever be like, I mean, obviously when they named it in 1980 when they were making Empire Strikes Back, they weren't like, oh, this base is named after a clone, but do you think it could ever be reverse engineered that like maybe Echo saves himself or does something, or not saves himself, but risks his life to save like Bail Organa or Mon Mothma or something, and then they, at some point name the base after him as like a sign of respect?
I think that's a good theory. I think we'll definitely see a lot of that kind of setup in this show where it's like we want to see the world transition from the prequel era to Rebellion era, and I think that could be a cool setup where it's like maybe they go to Hoth for an episode and they kind of like have to establish his base or something, and then Echo sacrifices himself and Bail Organa is like, we shall call this Echo Base, and then it's like, oh, Echo Base. Something like that. That could be fun.
Well, so people have this theory because there was this, I don't remember, there was like this character in Legends who resembled Echo a lot, and he had like his body kind of looked the same way as a cyborg, and he became so much of a computer at one point he like hooked up to a computer system and became like assimilated into it. So a lot of people think Echo might have the same fate. And I know because I was like looking up Echo Base to see, and I know according to somewhere, I don't know if it's in Empire Strikes Back or if it's just like a tweet Dave Filoni had of how much they can retcon it, but apparently like Echo Base was founded like 3 months before like Empire Strikes Back, like timeline wise. But if it's just like some reference book or something that's like not a novel or not a comic book, like they might just retcon that to be like, yeah, Echo founded Echo Base.
Yeah, I don't know if the show has much desire to not retcon stuff. Like
Yeah,
we've seen
yeah,
that they'll just be like, yeah, that canon comic didn't like doesn't matter. We'll just do our own
mm.
thing.
Well, yeah,
Throw the whole thing out.
yeah. Well, it's like the whole Twilight thing in the previous episode of Cutler Quain's stepkids being half human and half Twilight. The only thing that had ever said they were half human and half Twilight and not fully Twilight was like a tweet from Pablo Hidalgo that a fan had asked him if they were half human and he's or if they were hybrids, and he said yeah, they were hybrids. If they want to retcon a tweet, I don't give a shit. So if it's just like a reference book or something that they want to retcon, I really don't care. But then when you start getting into like comics and novels and things that you actually have said are canon, then that's where I'm like, well, you know.
Yeah, I think that could be interesting. I really do wonder what the fates are going to be of these characters because we don't see them anywhere in the original trilogy, really. But we could have said the same thing about the Rebels crew. And we did the whole time. We were like, oh, they gotta die, they gotta die, they gotta die. And of course, like a couple did,
Yeah.
but most of them were just kind of
Yeah.
found places out in the galaxy to exist beyond the story of Star Wars.
Yeah. But I mean, they're mostly gonna die of old age because of their accelerated aging anyway. So this is the show, like the Bad Batch crew. I'm not gonna be like, oh, they need to die just because they could be like, Dave Filoni could be like, yeah, they like helped out the Rebel Alliance up until their death, but pretty much they all died of old age before A New Hope, and I'd be like, okay, that's fine. I don't, you know,
I think a cool direction could be like some of them just end up like doing stuff.
yeah,
Like maybe they're out. One's a bartender or
yeah,
something, or one's like just out in the galaxy
yeah,
existing. And I think it could be cool. Even in Mandalorian, I don't know. Like you said, the accelerated aging would be a wrench in that plan. But if they could easily get around the accelerated aging, if they have an excuse for it,
yeah,
it could be cool. Like maybe in Book of Boba Fett or something like that, they just show up in a bar and it's like, oh, the bartender is also Tamara Morrison,
yeah,
is a clone who is still alive, just living in the world.
yeah. Maybe he got frozen carbonite for like 20 years, so he stopped aging.
Yeah, that's the excuse. Or they'll be like, yeah, we hacked the inhibitor chip and then we turned the button off that said aging and now he's just good.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I think that's kind of our last thought on theories. Do you want to move to our next and final conversation about what some of these phrases might mean in Rogue One?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
All right, I sent you the image so I could find it myself. All right, so let's start with the ones we know. Obviously, so here's what we have: Stellar Sphere, Mark Omega or Mach Omega, they weren't sure. Pax Aurora, War Mantle, Cluster Prism, Black Saber, and Stardust. Well, we know what Stardust does because that was in the movie. We now know what War Mantle is because of this episode. So let's start with Stellar Sphere. Like, obviously, my original thought is the Death Star, but so is Stardust. So, is there
I will
any like
say,
thoughts that come to your mind of like what potentially they might make? Because, like, let's be honest here. When they wrote these down, they were never like, okay, these are what all these mean, and eventually over time we will reveal them. Whoever wrote the movie was like, these sound cool,
yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was like, oh, these sound cool. A couple of
and
them
then
were
we'll
like,
reverse engineer them at some point to make them all into things.
that's exactly what it was. It was like, let's leave the other feature writers to like run with this stuff,
Yeah.
and maybe Black Saber was intentional, maybe some of that
Yeah.
stuff was intentional, but they're just vague enough that you could easily like move them around to be whatever you want them to be. But I will mention that the first three were brought up in the Catalyst novel, which is the prequel novel to
Yeah.
Rogue One
Which
that
is
came out a couple of months before Rogue One.
which is really good. If you were a fan of Rogue One, you should definitely read Catalyst because it'll make Rogue One that much better.
Yeah, I mean, even if you weren't a fan, maybe read it because it'll turn it from an alright movie into a much better one.
Yeah.
I recommend it for sure if you want to enhance your enjoyment of Rogue One. But those three were essentially just mentioned as like sub-projects of the Death Star, like kind of parts of that project.
Okay, so Stellar Sphere, Max Omega, or Mark Omega, and Pax Aurora.
Mm-hmm.
I had
But
a
I do
whole
think
I had a whole thought on what Pax Aurora was about because I didn't look any of them up. I think I looked up like two of them, and they were like Black Saber and Cluster Prism were the two I looked up. I think I
I
started from
think
the
though,
bottom and
because since it's Star Wars, they could easily just be like, okay, no, it means something else now, or they could be like, oh, it also means something else. You know, I think when they mention like, oh, those are parts of the Death Star project, that can also be like double meaning names and things like that, or used more than once. Like Black Saber has an obvious meaning of what it could refer to in Star Wars, like with the Dark Saber, but it could also be used for 100 other things. So I'm curious on your theories on that. But my
so,
stellar sphere theory was definitely something related to the Death Star. Maybe
yeah,
they're
yeah, maybe just
they're
the overall design or something.
mm-hmm.
Maybe it's the plumbing system of the Death Star.
Yeah. Maybe it's
But yeah,
just like a compliment. They're like, wow, it was really stellar sphere. Like we really like the spherical look of the Death Star. Good job.
yeah. So
Or
the
so.
so the one I had the biggest theory on was Pax Aurora because I'm like, okay, there's some Latin in here. Let's look up Pax. And Pax I knew meant peace in Latin, right? And Aurora can mean either two things, either like lights in the sky or the dawn, which I took dawn or beginning. So the peace beginning, and you would think, oh, that's like about the rebels or whatever. But then you have to remember this is from the Empire side of things, and what do they consider the dawn of peace? And I'm thinking, okay, probably the start of the Empire. And so I was thinking Pax Aurora could be Order 66, and
That's a
all the
good
things
one.
behind Order 66.
I like that. I was wondering about Mark Omega or whatever is Omega. That
Yeah,
he's
like
got
that one
Omega.
was like the easiest. Like Mark Omega. Oh, maybe that's about like Jedi cloning or something, or like force
Mm-hmm.
sensitive cloning.
Because it depends on where they go with Omega, but I do think Omega in some way or another is going to tie into Palpatine's
Yeah.
like immortality cloning kind of plan. So I do wonder if that Mark Omega is like
Yeah.
the final plan or something like that. Like Palpatine's end goal
Yeah.
would be in there. I don't know why he keep that on the Death Star hard drive. Like,
Yeah.
oh,
Well, I think that was
here's my
like,
final plan.
yeah, yeah. Maybe it was just like he's gonna destroy all the planets and then just make Palpatine clones, and every living being in the galaxy is gonna be a clone of Palpatine.
You open it up and it's just like the script of Rise of Skywalker. They're like, oh wow,
Oh.
what? How did this get here?
So I guess that leaves us Cluster Prism, and honestly, I have no idea. Cluster but Prism is like a thing that refracts light, and then just a bunch of things that reflect light. Originally, I've just thought the like basically the Kyber crystal laser system for the Death Star.
That's a really good theory. I like that. I was looking up some cluster prism. Did a little research on that one in particular, and I found some stuff in the old EU that it might be like a reference to,
Okay.
where in the original ideas of what the Death Star, how the Death Star was built, there was essentially like this prism that they kept the thing inside. And that's why it's round. So, and it had these clusters like these holes throughout the
Yeah.
prism. So I wonder if that cluster prism is a reference to like the original version of the Death Star construction, like in the EU.
Yeah.
Because I know that Pablo Hidalgo and those type of people like to throw in those little references here and there to legends, and even though they're kind of moving away from that a bit and getting more into the canon stuff, I wonder if that was a reference to that.
Yeah, that's possible, and it's one of those things that's super vague that they could make it whatever they want to be. Like
Yeah, a lot of these are so vague.
Stardust has nothing to do with anything, right? I mean, in Star Wars canon, it's named Stardust because he named it after his daughter because she had like sparkles in her eyes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, it's so like any of these could be anything. Like we look at Black Saber and we're like, oh, that's a reference to the Dark Saber, but that could be a reference to just like anything.
Mm-hmm. Cluster prism. Yeah, I mean, some of these are so vague they could be like anything they
It's
wanted
like the
them to be.
Nostradamus of just like file names of like we can make it anything we want. It's like astrology.
Mm-hmm. If it's vague enough, it'll work
Yeah,
for anything. It's like a
yeah,
fortune teller. They're like, "Oh, you will have fortune in the
yeah.
future," and they're like, "Oh, wow, they
At some
knew."
point in the future, something bad will happen to you, and you'll overcome it. And they're like, wow, this person knows so much about me.
You are struggling with something. Oh, wow,
Yeah,
mind reader.
yeah,
But I do think, like we've seen that Star Wars loves to take stuff, these tiny little things, and run with them and make like whole storylines out of them. So I
yeah,
wouldn't be surprised if literally everything on this list at some point becomes like a plot point in some show,
yeah.
even though they did mention, oh, a stellar sphere, Marco Pax Aurora, those were subproducts of the Death Star. Like that's all you really know is like, oh, they're part of the project to make the Death Star. Like that could mean anything.
Yeah, like I mean,
Stellar,
some of this could, like cluster prism, could be like a reference to the poison that they used to take out. I can't remember the species. It's the species from episode 3. That's in that, or no, episode 2. Sorry, on the Geonosians. Is that a species? I don't know. The people on
sure.
Geonosis that were taken out, that you find out in Catalyst, I believe, were taken out. Via poison or something because they knew too much about the Death Star because they're the ones that made it. And Palpatine didn't want anyone to know really about the Death Star. So it's like, hey, thanks for your help, and you're all dead.
Yep. I really like that. I don't know. I do think these are going to become something, and even if they're not now, they will be. You know, Black Saber was a thing that people kind of, when they mentioned it in the theater, there was a little bit of like, who? Like, you could tell who was like the Star Wars fanboys in the theater were like, oh, Black Saber.
Yeah. As much as I'm a fan of Maul, and technically I guess Maul did wield the dark saber. The dark saber is my favorite weapon in all of Star Wars.
Yeah, I like it too. I don't know if we'll see it in this series or
want
not. It doesn't really have a place.
I want the Hasbro one, but it's like $200. So, but it looks sick.
It does look awesome. I think, like that was such a cool moment when he came out. I can't remember the character's name in Mandalorian, where he comes out at the end of the first season and he has the dark saber.
Giancarlo Esposito's character. But...
Yep. Really big moment where you're like, oh look, the animated stuff really does matter to this live action stuff, and I think that's what I'm looking forward to the most. Not the most, but one thing I'm looking forward to in this show is like you start off and you think like, oh, it's just like a show, and then as it goes along, you start getting these connective tissues and these bigger and bigger things, and I'm sure we're only 3 episodes in, we're already talking about like, oh, what does this say about the future of the Kaminoans in Star Wars? What does this say about all this lore? And as we go further and further and further, I'm sure we're gonna get a lot of unexpected stuff here.
Yeah, we could also see, because I'm just trying to think, if we do get a siege of Kamino, that could be like Vader's coming out party, and that could be like the first time a lot of like characters see and hear about Vader, and that could be like, oh shit, like what the fuck is this moment?
Yeah, they really got to hold Vader off, I think, for a little bit, because that's like a big.
Yeah, I could see that as like season finale thing of like. I could see that if it's like Siege of Kamino, clones are winning, they're beating these conscripted soldier stormtroopers, and then you just see like some early model TIE fighter come down and Vader steps out, and then it's just like it's a wrap after that.
I think that's definitely the direction they go with that. It's gonna be Vader's like that building tension throughout this show. Like they have this super soldier essentially out there that can go and just kill this entire Bad Batch without even trying,
Yeah, we've had so many theories about what's gonna happen in the finale. Like one of them is bound to be right. Like we've had, like Hunter's chip is gonna Hunter's chip is gonna activate and he's about to die, and Omega's gonna use Force Heal to like fix him because the thing fixing him is like craps out.
We had the Siege of Kamino. We had Maul's gonna show up. It's gonna be like a Maul.
Yeah,
reveal.
I'm over that theory. Like no, there's been zero reference to. I'm not gonna say Maul's never gonna be in this show, but as far as season 1 goes, I think we can rule Maul out. I think
Maul's something you say for season 2 or 3.
I think the whole red Clone Wars logo was only that burned out. Was only because like that's what the Clone Wars logo was like the last season of the Clone Wars, because Maul was there. But I think that's the only reason why it was red in the beginning of the Bad Batch. Is because it was. We would have had some kind of reference to like Maul or Mandalore or anything tying to Maul. We would have had at this point, I think, if Maul was gonna show up, and he hasn't. And I could, they could name drop Maul next up. Like they could see Rex and he could talk all about Maul and how terrifying and menacing Maul is next episode, and I could change my tune. But
yeah, as soon as you think we're ahead of the show, we're not really. Like we thought we were ahead of like, oh, what are the Kaminoans gonna do? They have a plan, and we're like, oh, we're ahead of that. But then by this episode, they're like, oh yeah, the Kaminoans have a plan. And we're like, oh okay, we're not actually ahead of the show at all. And you could ask me for 100 predictions, and I never would have had. They're gonna name drop the random computer program thing from Rogue One.
Yeah.
So they could easily pull anything out of their ass if they wanted to in this show, and that's what I like about that. They can just do anything really. They're not constrained by live action. They're not constrained by, but I mean they have a budget, but it's not as the same as being a live action budget where you can only do so much.
It takes the same time to animate Luke Skywalker as it does a random nobody. So
Mm-hmm. Any final predictions going into this episode 4?
I have no idea. Like all of the other the first 3 episode titles were leaked before episode 1 came out, so I kind of had a rough idea of where things would go and runtime. But now I have no idea what's gonna happen next week. I assume more Crosshair being Crosshair, but I have no idea. I think the Empire side is a little easier to predict, but as far as the Bad Batch side, I have no idea what to expect. I think we gotta start to get to them because there was the whole thing of them becoming mercenaries. I think we gotta see them like try to pull a job or do something, and so that could be a possibility of them.
Yeah, I'm thinking next week. I'm thinking next week might be a bit of a filler. Not a filler necessarily, but just like them having an adventure of the week type episode.
Yeah.
I think we need a little bit of a space there, and we might not even see Crosshair next week. I think we might get a gap in there again. We had him gone last week. Maybe he'll be gone this week. They gotta drag out that plot a little bit because they have a whole season to get through that kind of stuff. And we do know the Kaminoans have this plot to lure the Bad Batch back in, so we might see that come up next week, like some kind of means of drawing them back to Kamino.
Yeah.
But I think next week probably will be a filler episode. If I was gonna guess how they draw them back to Kamino, it might tie into our Siege of Kamino type theory. Like maybe this whole siege is done just as a way to lure the Bad Batch back to Kamino. Maybe they send out a signal like, "Oh, Kamino's under attack," and the Bad Batch have to come back and defend their homeland. Similarly to Rookies or whatever, one of the episodes of Clone Wars where the clone team has to come back to Kamino and kind of defend their home planet.
Yeah. Yeah, that's also a possibility. I could see them like name dropping somebody like a famous Jedi and being like, "Hey, this Jedi's here. You want to come see him? He needs your help." Like Anakin Skywalker is here. He needs your help.
I could see them luring them in with Captain Rex too. We've gotten name drop of Rex last week, and they're kind of right on the heels of him a little bit. So they could be like, "Oh, we got a signal from Rex at Kamino," so they head back to Kamino, and then it's not Rex at all. It's Crosshair.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a possibility.
I'm excited though. I'm liking this show a lot. They continue to impress me every week. I keep waiting for them to slow down and give me a filler episode, like I mentioned. And even when they have these slower episodes like this, it still connects and still has tissue there where you feel like you're not wasting your time watching it.
No. No. Yeah, it's definitely, if you're a Star Wars fan, you should definitely be watching The Bad Batch. I'm really enjoying it. It's definitely a lot better than WandaVision, that shit show of a show.
Look, we're only 3 episodes in. This could go full WandaVision in the last 3 episodes. You could be watching a Disney Channel original movie by the end.
Yeah, that's very true. All right, I think I've said everything I need to say about this episode. So
I had a good time with it. Can't wait for next one.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for watching. Have a nice night or day or morning whenever you're watching this.